Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started shortly. We're having some login issues, but thank you so much for joining us to our webinar on reading reform in New York City, teaching kids, empowering parents, supporting teachers. We're so excited that you joined us today for this important and timely discussion. My name is Natasha Quiroga. I am the Director of Education Policy and Inside Schools at the New Schools Center for New York City Affairs, and I will be your moderator today. The New Schools Center for New York City Affairs is an applied policy research institute that drives innovation and social policy. And Inside Schools helps families navigate the New York City public school system. So today we're going to be focusing on literacy instruction in New York City public schools. The launch of NYC Reads, the Department of Education's new literacy initiative based around the science of reading, has raised many challenges, including how to communicate to families these new changes in curriculum and how it will impact their children. So our panel today will discuss New York City's reading reform efforts in elementary schools and explore the science of reading, statewide policy impact, and provide insights on improving children's reading skills. Our panelists are going to focus on best practices and informing families about these changes and providing guidance on supporting their children in reading, especially our city's most marginalized children. So we've got an amazing group of speakers today, including Jeff Smink, Deputy Director at Education Trust New York, Novella Bailey, Special Projects and Initiatives Lead for District 3 Manhattan, Pilar Ramos, Principal of Arts and Letters, 305 United, Teresa Ranieri, School-Based Literacy Coach at PS 443, the Family School, Yana Semiglazova, a parent who is thank you for our last minute addition. Our previous parent had to back out due to a family commitment and family emergency. So we're thankful Yana was able to join us on such short notice. And finally, Tabitha Garcia, a parent workshop facilitator at La Fuerza de Familias Latinas. So that's who'll be speaking today. We'd love to hear more about you. So if you could fill out the poll that you see on your screen and share what your role is and where you're tuning in from, that would be great. So let me see if we're going to get started. If you just want to share that information, we have a lot of great questions for our speakers today. Just some housekeeping. Yes, this webinar will be recorded. We'll be sharing it with all the participants and everyone who registered in an email. And it'll also include some resources and links that our speakers will be referencing today. We will be monitoring as best as we can the chat feature, but if you have any questions, if you could type it into the Q&A feature, we have about 20 minutes at the end of the webinar for audience questions. So please feel free to add those in while everybody is filling out the poll. Looks like we've got a lot of educators, some community advocates, a good number of parents and guardians, and a lot of others as well. And looks like we've got folks from primarily New York City, Manhattan and Brooklyn, and some folks from the Bronx and Queens, as well as other parts of the US and New York State. So great to see everybody who is here today. And let's go ahead and end the poll. I think we've got most people who have answered. And we're going to get started with Jeff. So let's go ahead and pin Jeff so that we can ask Jeff some questions. Jeff, Jeff is Deputy Director of Education Trust New York. Jeff, can you give us an overview of what's going on in New York and the reading crisis, and maybe a little bit of an overview as well of New York City Reads?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me, and great to be with you all this afternoon. Natasha, should I share my screen or will you have my slides? What's the best way to?
If you want to share your screen,
okay.
So that.
Just give me a second here. Okay. So again, great to be with you all. For those not familiar, at Trust New York, we are a statewide advocacy organization focused on the needs of students of color and students from low-income backgrounds. And again, we work all across the state, but certainly do a lot in New York City. And early literacy has been one of our top priorities for several years now, because when we talk about equity, it all starts with literacy. And so our work is very much grounded. I always start with this slide of Frederick Douglass, who, among many great things, said, once you learn to read, you'll be forever free. And that really drives our work at EdTrust New York. So I thought what I would do is just kind of start out with some really high level overview of what we know about New York's reading crisis, what's happening in New York City and across New York State. And really my goal is to provide kind of a high level overview, and then you'll hear from folks on the ground to give you a really good perspective of what's actually happening in schools right now. So first, as I started with that slide of Frederick Douglass, we start from the premise that reading is both a civil right, it's a human right, it's foundational for full participation in American society. That's where it starts, right? Before we get into the science of reading and the academics and all those different things, that's where it starts. We also know research is crystal clear that third grade reading proficiency, being able to read at grade level by the end of third grade, is, if not one of, the most important indicator of future student success. There's data showing that for all students not reading at the end of third grade, they're 4 times more likely to drop out of school. For students of color, it's 8 times more likely. And, unfortunately, we know that when students are not taught to read, as I said, it increases dropout rates, it increases or it impacts public safety, it impacts poverty, unemployment, public health, all the things that we care about, in New York City and our neighborhoods across our communities. That's the bad news, right? On the positive side, we know that when students can read, anything is possible, right? When they have that foundation, they can accomplish anything. So yeah, that's just wanted to give that kind of high level overview. Getting into the data a little bit, the research shows that with the right support, 95% of all students, regardless of background, can learn to read, right? Yet in New York City, if we look at, whatever data, we can look at federal data, state data, local data, less than half of our third graders are reading proficiently. It's even lower when we look at students of color. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, which we can get into. But fundamentally, it comes down to the fact that we have not provided our educators and our students with the evidence-based support and instruction that they deserve. And that's where we'll talk more about kind of what that looks like. And a lot of that is aligned with the science of reading. But fundamentally, right, we have not given our educators and our students what they deserve to become good readers. So I wanted to spend just a minute on kind of the New York City reads, with a caveat again that we have other experts on this call that can go into much more detail, but just wanted to provide a quick overview of what New York City reads is. Again, based on the science of reading, which I'll talk about in a minute, it's a 2-year phase-in. So right now we're in the middle or towards the end actually of phase 1, which started this school year. 15 districts are implementing this initiative. Next year it'll go district-wide with the remaining 17 districts. There's a lot to it, but at the core is this idea of using an evidence-based curricula in schools. We know that too many schools, both in New York City and across New York State, had been using curricula proven not to be effective in teaching kids to read, particularly students of color, students from low-income backgrounds. And so what New York City did is required every school in the city to choose from one of 3 curricula, which I'm sure our panelists can talk more about those curricula, but all 3 are aligned with the science of reading. And so that's where the phase we're in now. I think it's really important to share that just adopting a curriculum is not going to get us to the outcomes that we need. It's a crucial step, but one of the key factors that has to go along with that is professional learning, support, and coaching for educators. And that's an additional major part of New York City Reads, right? And then we're talking teachers, principals, district superintendents. Everyone has to be on the same page. And I think one of the things that we've seen, and I know, we're hearing in New York City, is there's both the how, right? How do we do this in the classroom, but also the why, right? We have to make sure teachers understand why we need this, and get their buy-in and support, because without that, it's not going to be successful. So there's a lot of work that has to happen in that coaching and professional learning for educators, which hopefully we can dig into as we go through our panelists. And then finally, I just want to share, this is a big effort. As you know, New York City is the biggest district in the nation. you're not only asking for a shift in curricula, you're asking educators many educators, not all, to shift their practice and sometimes their belief systems. That's a lot of work. It's going to take time. We're not going to see results right now. I know there was an article that came out a couple of weeks ago, already taking a look at some of the early results. It's too early to tell, right, how effective this is going to be. And I think we really need to give it time and space to really, um, get ingrained across districts. And again, it's not just a curriculum, it has to be a systemic, coherent approach all the way across the system. And I know that leaders in New York City are working on that, but it's not easy work. I wanted to do, again, you're gonna hear me say high level a lot, but just kind of orient folks with what the science of reading is and isn't. I'm sure many of you have been hearing a lot about it, and are probably already familiar with it, but again, just to set the stage, it's a body of scientifically based research about reading that informs how proficient reading and writing develop. I'll talk more about what it isn't, but it's not, that's all it is. It's science, it's research about how people learn how to read. It includes 5 pillars. You probably heard a lot about phonics is kind of the one most people talk about, but it also includes phonemic awareness, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Again, phonics is a crucial piece of this in developing those foundational skills, right? And helping students sound out words and learn how the sounds go together, but it's not the only thing. Another big piece that's essential is this idea of knowledge building, right? And really understanding, what's being read, what's being spoken about. And just another way to think about it at the bottom here, this is a very, again, simplified chart, but just this idea that learning how to decode, again, that's that phonics piece, combined with language comprehension, the ability to understand spoken language, gets us to that ultimate goal of reading comprehension. Again, super high level, but hopefully it just orients folks. I do think it's important because unfortunately we're hearing a lot of, either misinformation or just confusion about what the science of reading is and isn't. So here are a few things that the science of reading is not. So again, it's not just about phonics. That's one important piece of it, but by all means, not the only thing. It's also not a one-size-fits-all approach, and these are kind of criticisms that we hear about the science of reading. There's room within the science of reading to meet the individual needs of students, right? Some kids need more support on phonics, some might need more support on comprehension, fluency. There's room to differentiate within this body of research. It's not a curriculum, it's not an instructional approach, right? This is just the science about how people learn how to read. And the curricula is then, ideally aligned with that science. Another thing we hear is that the science of reading can detract from other things that schools and communities care about, whether that's social emotional learning, culturally responsive learning. And we see the science of reading very much aligned with both those things. Particularly if we think about social emotional learning, we know if you're a student struggling to read, it's very difficult to feel connected to school, to have school be a place you want to be, to have us make it a place that supports your social emotional needs. So for our money, right, being able to read really can impact a lot of these social emotional learning issues that we know are so important. And then lastly, the science of reading is primarily thought of around what schools can do, but there's also opportunities to apply it outside of school, whether that's for summer and after school programs. Parents can use it, within their homes with their own child. So there's lots of opportunities, ideally, right, to surround kids with the science, with the evidence around reading, all the time, not just in school. So at EdTrust New York, we put out a report last year that was really designed to be a kind of a landscape of where we are, both across New York State and New York City, on literacy, more broadly, and then the science of reading specifically. I just wanted to share a few findings from that report. The first one is that parents overwhelmingly support the science of reading. I believe we had 93% of the parents. We did a statewide poll, parents from across the state, and 93% of parents supported the science of reading and thought it needed to be in their schools. We also had a lot of parents that had not heard about the science of reading. This was done about a year ago, so I think that's probably changed a little bit since then. But a lot of education and awareness still needs to happen, for parents. But overwhelmingly, they support the science and they want to be more involved and have more tools to help their kids succeed in school, and also more transparency from their schools about how reading is being taught within their school. We also did focus groups with teachers, both elementary teachers, but also middle and high school teachers, who, almost unanimously saw the benefits of the science of reading, but also saw what happens when kids can't read, right? And we talked with older elementary teachers, I'm talking grades 4, 5, 6, middle school teachers, high school teachers, right, who saw kids not able to engage in the classroom, whether it's a math class, a science class, because they were struggling to read, which could lead, to attendance issues, to behavioral challenges. So teachers really across the board saw the challenge or the benefits of reading, but also, and again, I think it's really important that we tend to focus on K-3 and those early learners, which is really important. But we know that a lot of older learners, those older elementary grades and even in the middle school, missed out on a lot of instruction during the pandemic, right? And need extra support in reading. And it's a challenge because, as we know, a lot of those teachers, once you get past the 3rd grade, don't have as much expertise in teaching reading. So we can't forget, our older children. And then finally, I think this one is probably the most important finding, and probably not surprising to many of you. It's something we at Trust New York see all the time, and that is this idea of low expectations for all students, but particularly our students of color and from low-income backgrounds. Right? Remember, I shared at the outset, over 90% of kids can learn to read. We have schools across the city and state where it's the inverse, right? Where 9 out of 10 kids are not reading. And, I think unfortunately, across the state, we have sort of become numb to that, or normalized it a little bit. And we need to get past that. It needs to start with high expectations and the belief that all kids can read with the right support. Because without that, it's going to be tough to do all the other things that we care about. Part of our work at Trust New York is to really highlight schools and districts and communities that are doing good work and that are getting improved outcomes to show that it can be done. So I'll close on a hopeful note. There's a lot of data out there, and it can be a little overwhelming at times. I think the great news is we know this is a solvable crisis, right? We know that we can get many, many, many more kids reading at grade level. We have proof points, beginning to happen and emerging all over the state and all over the country. We also, there is, unprecedented attention around the country on this issue. 45 states have passed legislation aligning with the science of reading. We're working on that in New York State. There's actually some progress in the budget that was just passed, which I can talk about more later if folks have questions. But please know, we can do this work. It's going to take all of us. It's going to take state leadership. It's going to take continued leadership from the New York City Department of Ed. It's going to take community partners. And so what we've done at Trust New York is launch what we call the New York Campaign for Early Literacy, which is a statewide effort on all these different issues that I just talked about. We have over 100 organizations across the state that are a part of it, ranging from early childhood providers, libraries, school districts, nonprofits, really anyone in that kind of birth to 8 field that cares about this issue and believes that we can do better. And what we're doing at the campaign is both advocating for policy changes, but also, again, supporting parents, supporting communities, and building awareness about this work. And again, sharing best practices and sharing stories of what can happen when we really prioritize this issue. And then just to close, whenever I speak with a group, I always try to close with this, and this idea of imagine what New York City, and more specifically, right, maybe the school that you work in, your neighborhood, your community, what it would look like when all kids are taught to read, what the impact is going to be on, the joy of learning and attendance in your schools, whether that's, public safety, less kids getting in trouble after school or when they're not in school, the impact on employment, on poverty rates, all those things. It's going to look a lot different, right? It's going to take a while. But that's really what drives our work is having that vision of what New York City, what New York State is going to look like when we get more kids learning how to read. So I think I will stop there. And we have some great panelists that can go more into the details of what it looks like on the ground. But hopefully that was a good kind of overview, and then happy to answer questions as we move on. So I'll kick it back to you.
Thanks so much, Jeff. That's very helpful context for our discussion today and a great overview. So let's turn to Novella Bailey. She's the Special Project and Initiatives Lead in District 3. Novella, during the NYC Reads initiative, what support is the city offering to districts and how is it filtering into individual schools?
Great. Thanks. So I guess what the city is providing really through the central offices is opportunities for teachers and principals and district teams to engage in training aligned to the curriculum that the district has chosen. I'm in District 3, and our district is moving forward with Wit and Wisdom, and we are in the phase 2. So we're preparing for the fall 2024 implementation. So inside of that, one of the things that school communities are receiving really for teachers and principals are the opportunity to engage in in-depth unpacking of the curriculum. So one is just really understanding some of the things that Jeff mentioned, kind of like, well, what is the rationale for this? How does this curriculum tap into the science of reading? What are the different frameworks that are in place inside of the curriculum? And then just the vocabulary inside of the curriculum, so that when teachers begin to plan and navigate through the curriculum, they have an understanding of the why and the rationale behind it. So principals and APs and district level coaches, they have the opportunity to attend training that's like probably about 2 or 3 hours, and then they can also join the teacher training. Teacher training is 3 days long for Wit and Wisdom, so it's pretty intense, and they're able to go through pretty much the key elements of the modules. And in Wit and Wisdom, modules is just another word for the unit. So they look at the year-long curriculum, go into understanding what's in each module, why it's there, and then how those different elements tap into those pieces that were mentioned related to building content knowledge, grappling with real-world questions and compelling topics. How does this relate to vocabulary deep dives? How does the curriculum provide supports for students that are learning English, right? Our ENL students, and also how can teachers use this curriculum, which is pretty dense, right? To think about what that means for our students that may have IEPs. So that's pretty much the bulk of the work, the bulk of the supports that districts are receiving, that then principals and APs and teachers can attend. In addition to that, I think that many of the districts are figuring out, well, that's great and it's not enough. So how can we provide the scaffolds and supports on the district level to really make an impactful launch of the curriculum? So in District 3, one of the things that the superintendent's team has done has really thought about some additional grants that they may have received and how we can really partner with Wit and Wisdom, which is the group, the curriculum provider that we're working with, to go even deeper. So we are also offering additional training for our coaches, entire coaching team, and how to actually lead the work of going into a deep dive of a module or a lesson and understanding those key elements. So then when we are working with school leaders and when we're working with teacher teams, we can support them and guide them through the work. Oh, and one thing that I didn't mention also that the city is providing, and is in our first full implementation year, the district will receive about 19 days of coaching for each school. So once we start and we're full into that curriculum, the superintendent's team will be working with Wit and Wisdom or the consultants that will be providing that support, so that our schools get a really healthy, robust amount of on-the-job coaching and support with the implementation plan.
Great, thank you. That sounds like a lot.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is a lot. And we also want to help teachers. I think one thing for us as a district is thinking, well, how can we really help this be meaningful for teachers? So we also are hosting day-long sessions by grade band. So teachers, like all of the 5th grade teachers, have the opportunity then to have a training with a facilitator from Wit and Wisdom, as well as our district coaches, to begin to go deeper into the modules, unpack the lessons, and then actually begin to plan for their first module that they'll implement in the fall. Many of our schools are taking on a pilot this spring. So they're looking to teach, maybe even if they're only teaching 5 or 6 lessons, which is considered an arc, if they can get into that one arc of lessons and get get a feel of what it would look like in front of students that will also allow them to reflect and then plan meaningfully for fall of 2024.
Okay, that's great. It sounds like a lot of effort to make sure that teachers are informed and well prepared for this curriculum. Can you let's shift a little bit to the parents? Can you share an example from an elementary school in your district of an effective practice for informing the parents about the new reading curriculum and involving them in their children's learning process?
Great. So, I mean, we're still in the kind of planning and preparation phase, but one thing I will say that our schools are doing is one, just making sure that parents are connected to all of these district-wide events that are happening that are parent-facing that allow them to understand the curriculum and then also the science of reading. So last year, we had several town halls and we also had in our CEC meetings and all of those other things, spaces for families to actually engage with the curriculum. We also had some focus groups with parents so that they can understand more so what are the key elements of the curriculum. On the school level, our school leaders, and we had a principals meeting where we actually were talking about wit and wisdom this morning. But I was talking to some of my colleagues, and principals are partnering with the PTA and thinking about how to bring these pieces into the spring PTA meeting so that folks have an opportunity to look at the tasks, look at the text, and also really thinking about how when that information is communicated, how it also connects to the other initiatives that are happening in the school. So it feels like it's meaningful, purposeful work that relates to the vision and the mission of the school. Some other things that I know principals are thinking about is really lifting up and highlighting a lot of those celebrations, because a lot of the curriculums that are selected, especially with wit and wisdom and EL, there are a lot of performance tasks. So there's opportunities for students to demonstrate their learning and understanding in really rich, exciting ways. So pulling in families for that. And then also working alongside the PCs in each school. Principals are doing that and thinking about how we can leverage some of the materials that are already embedded in the curriculum, because like some of the curriculums already have parent-facing videos. They have things that are written in English and Spanish and other languages that are parent-facing that can help them understand the key elements of the curriculum.
Thank you for sharing that. I know we're going to go a little bit more in depth into what parents can do and how schools can best reach parents. And so that's helpful. And just one last question, what are schools and teachers' concerns as they implement NYC Reads initiatives?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think there are several things. One, I think always when we're looking at a new initiative is time, and really dedicated time for the planning and preparation. There's an article, or not an article, but there's an excerpt of some of the resources from EL, which is one of the curriculums that many of our schools across the city are using. And it says, it's for teachers. And it says, well, how do I plan when the planning is done for me? And I think for some of our teachers, the thinking is now, okay, we have a curriculum that's very rich, that's evidence, it's research-based. It has a lot of content, core knowledge, but now how do we have the time to think really critically about meeting the needs of the students that are in front of us? So I think that's a concern, right? So there's a lot of resources, they're rich resources, they're valuable, but then how can we support teachers in effectively thinking about differentiation, effectively thinking about the needs of our ENL students, and modifying or tweaking, right, this rich curriculum in a way that's going to make sense for the students in front of them? I would say that's the primary concern. Another thing that has come up is when we talk about CRSE and having culturally responsive and sustaining education practices, looking at a question that's come up is like, are these texts the texts that we want to use? Or if we're using these texts and we're using this curriculum, because it is a citywide initiative, what other enhancements can be put in place to support the communities that our principals are working to build, right, alongside their families and teachers? So that's something that's come up. And there actually are some resources within the curriculum where there's space to engage in that, and thinking about how we can further enhance the curriculum that a particular school is using. Let me see, I think you said concerns. And also just thinking about special populations and making sure, like, we have some focus groups right now that are being led by our coaches. One is for some of our special education teachers that might be teaching in a 12-1-1 classroom or a self-contained classroom. Well, what does that look like? What would wit and wisdom look like in that particular setting? Or how do we support ELs? And our district has a high percentage of students that are, entering or emerging with their understanding of English and learning English. So how do we think about the curriculum and using it in a meaningful way to support all of our students? I would say those are probably some of the key concerns as we move forward with this initiative.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you so much, Noella. So we heard sort of from the district level. Let's bring it down to the school level. So Pilar Ramos is principal at the Academy of Arts and Letters in Brooklyn. Principal Ramos, can you briefly tell us where your school stands in the NYC Reads initiative?
Yes, hi everyone. So yeah, we are in District 13 in Brooklyn, and we're in phase 2. So that means that we are right now, we went through a long year of choosing and selecting a curriculum, and our district chose Expeditionary Learning, EL, which is a project-based curriculum. And we are currently piloting modules and units from the curriculum at this point in the school year, and we plan to fully implement in the fall of 2024.
Great. And so as your school shifts the curriculum programs, what are your key priorities?
So, right now we're learning a new curriculum, and that's a priority, and that's hard work, especially as you're still, teaching every day. And so all of the different things that Novella shared are things that our teachers are doing. They're going to 3 days of PD. I'm attending PD. And so there's lots of learning that's happening. But actually our priorities for literacy really remain the same. So our priorities are that we are having a systematic approach, school-wide approach to literacy. We believe that it's really important that students learn skills, especially in their early foundational learning, that they have exposure and learn phonics, and they have phonemic awareness, and that they're learning all of those really important literacy skills alongside being exposed to relevant and engaging content, that they have the opportunities to really apply the skills that they're learning in those phonics classes to something that matters to them, that means something to them. We are, I just had a group of kindergarten students in here today talking, and I asked them what the most interesting and what's something they really loved about school. And they all talked about different aspects of how they're able to share their work with their families and how they're able to apply. And they talked about the content and the tree study and things that they've done. And they used the phonics and all of that, but nobody named phonics as the thing that they were most excited about, even though it is a really important element of their learning. We also prioritize that there are opportunities for students. We're actually a pre-K through 8th grade school. And so we prioritize opportunities for students who need interventions to receive those interventions, not at the expense of their grade level learning, literacy learning. And so that there are times throughout the day that students get what they need, but also that they're exposed to that same high level content that they're interested in. And, we also are just really prioritizing continuing to build a school-wide culture of reading across grades K through 8. We just had a library renovation. We have a full-time librarian. We have library classes in kindergarten through 5th grade. It's Reading Spirit Week. Today was Dress Like Your Favorite book character day. Tomorrow's book swap day. And so just being and getting excited about reading and all the different ways that reading happens in our world, in our lives.
That sounds a lot of fun. And that sounds great for the children. So, let's shift a little bit to the parents now. How does your school engage parents in supporting their children's reading? I mean, sounds like there's a lot of fun activities at the school, but in terms of engaging parents, what approaches have been most effective? Can you give us a couple of examples?
Yeah. So I think first off, we have workshops for families by grade band, families on foundational literacy and understanding what the science of reading is, what that looks like at school, what are some of the things that you could be doing as a parent to support literacy that are not necessarily go out and hire a tutor, but just the everyday activities that you can be engaging with your children. And so we do that. We have, along with the rest of the city, been using literacy screeners, and we've been working to support families in understanding what those screeners tell us and what those screeners don't tell us, sharing how we use the screeners, and also we've been, and this is not parents specifically, but we have been, teachers learned about the screeners when we started implementing them as well. And so it was really important that teachers knew and understand what the screeners were telling us, weren't telling us, how to communicate screener information and data with families. And so we have invested a lot of time and resources in making sure that teachers understand, so that when they're conferring with parents, they can really share factual information and be knowledgeable about them as well. We also, we have newsletters that we share. We've been sharing, as the New York City Reads Initiative has been underway, we've been sharing with our PTA, with our SLT, with our different, bodies, what this means for us, what's going to be similar about our curriculum, what may change. And we feel really fortunate that at the core of the expeditionary learning curriculum that we're using, that we share our school's beliefs around reading, and about how children learn to read best are really expressed in that curriculum as well. And so we're not having to sacrifice beliefs. And we also, we have a reading specialist. We also have interventionists. And so we do progress monitoring, which is for students who are receiving interventions, we do a little bit extra assessing to make sure that those interventions are working. And we have regular meetings with families, the intervention teachers, communicate the results of that progress monitoring with families as well, to help to support in between the 3 big screeners that we administer.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I can't leave any question without talking about building excitement and culture of reading in our school. We have a library committee within our PTA. And that committee is like really one of the core committees in the PTA. They do a lot to support reading, excitement, and just information about reading with the community.
Great. Thank you for sharing all those many different ways that you're engaging families. And so specifically, I know you briefly touched on this, but can you share how you navigate the differing needs of parents whose children require varying levels of explicit phonics instruction?
Yeah, so we have in our school what we call a strategic reading period. We have that from grades 1 through 8 and in kindergarten a little bit. And it is a period in the day where students students are grouped with other students who have the same reading needs or thereabouts. It's a commonly programmed reading period. And they're able to have differentiated instruction, either intervention or acceleration, depending on what their needs are. And so that happens as young as, first grade, goes all the way up through 8th grade. And it really gives us an opportunity for us to target students' needs where they are, and then communicate that information with families. And as I said before, our intervention groups have progress monitoring built into them. And so families are hearing from their child's intervention teacher about the results of that progress monitoring. And so sometimes progress monitoring may lead us to determine that a next step is really for us to learn more information and to get and to recommend an evaluation or seek that pathway. Sometimes progress monitoring may show that an intervention is working and that a student will be moved out of that intervention group. But that model for literacy instruction that we have allows us to be really targeted. Strategic reading teachers are communicating with families as students are in those groups, and it's a different person who is specifically communicating with families about their reading.
Great, thank you. That was really great comprehensive information regarding the school level. So thank you so much, Principal Ramos, for sharing that. So now we'll chat with Teresa, who is a school-based literacy coach at PS 443, the family school. Teresa, could you give us a brief overview of your literacy training and what you do at PS 443?
Yes, so I was fortunate enough to be hired in 2017 as part of the Universal Literacy Initiative. And that is when this science of reading conversation, systematic explicit instruction first started in New York City. So it's not new. We've been having the conversation, especially kindergarten through second grade, since 2016, 2017. So I was assigned to support the family school. And I was very fortunate that the principal, Rowena Penn, understood my passion, and that for me, I almost feel like I have to make something up, because as a DOE teacher doing the wrong thing, I was a master teacher recognized by Teachers College of all things. I know I'm responsible for the school to prison pipeline, right? And if you go by statistics, I've probably helped contribute to 500 students not learning how to read. So every day I want to rectify my mistakes and things I did wrong in the past. We started at the family school realizing that it really begins with teacher content knowledge. And then me having to stay one step ahead because our teachers are so amazing. So when you come to our school, all of the teachers, kindergarten through fifth grade, now pre-K through fifth grade, including paraprofessionals, have their 30-hour Orton Gillingham classroom certificate. So I had to go become an associate member of the academy so I can continue to support them. All of the teachers in our school have completed letters, and this is well before the city started initiating it. And all of our teachers that finished letters have now done the Writing Revolution training. So we really believe any of the curriculum that we would be given, because we have the content knowledge, we would be able to implement it successfully. Everything from the phonemic awareness, the phonics, the fluency, the importance of vocabulary in all content areas, social studies and science especially. And then in K-2, the language comprehension, and then 2 to 5, the reading comprehension. So I did leave when universal literacy was disbanded, no more. The principal asked me if I would stay and now support K-5, and I did. So for me, coaching is a little bit different because I'm speaking to a lot of teachers that know a lot, right? And the questions they ask aren't your basic questions. So we have to have a Cadence mentor on site so that we can answer those questions about screening, diagnostic, progress monitoring, because we spend so much time looking at data to identify the needs of each child, because each child is special and unique, and I can't have a one size fits all. Like there's some intervention programs, you still have to know the student's data. Data drives instruction. And we still have to, just keep learning and improving, right? So to us at our school, that's been the biggest piece. So as a result, in District 9, we had the highest growth in our MAP data last year. We went up 40%, I think, on the ELA state test. We didn't do test prep. We really just increased our instruction using the latest research on how the brain works. So we're a co-located school. If you walk in the door and you make a left, you have a certain percentage to learn how to read. But if you make a right and come to our school, you have over a 60% chance of learning how to read. And that's the same neighborhood, the same community, the same challenges as everyone else. So I kind of think it's working. I feel very fortunate to have a principal who is a math person. She's like, math is my jam, but she listens and she looks at research, and she's doing letters herself. She's doing the writing revolution training herself. Like, she's really learning and empowering everyone. And I'm fortunate enough to have a whole school full of teachers that also believe in it. And they're willing to do the training and the learning outside their regular school day in order to make it happen. Our school chose HMH into reading. This is our third year, because we saw that there was a need for a curriculum to support it. And our principal, we visited many curriculums, and this is before the city had picked which ones you could choose. But this was the curriculum that our teachers chose. And so it was my job as the literacy coach to get in it and learn everything I could about it, and help our teachers and students implement it the best way they can. We do involve our parents. I know that's something you've been asking. We have specific family letters that go out in English, Spanish, French, Arabic. And if they needed another language, we would find it. Not only in just the general module newsletter, but a more specific one for the phonics instruction for our parents that goes out. We have parent workshops. We do have project-based learning as part of HMH into Learning. Now, we didn't do it our first year because, you're learning a curriculum and you can become overwhelmed doing too much. But now that we're 3 years in, we do project-based learning, and we invite our parents to come into school and celebrate the projects. And then mid-year, we realized some of these could be more culturally engaging, so we started tweaking them. Our fifth graders wrote letters to the editor about Asthma Alley, because that's our community. So it's still aligned with HMH into Reading, but it's appropriate for our neighborhood. Our first graders will be hosting a poetry cafe. What we changed is we have an established poet from the Bronx coming in to work with us. When we looked at the arts in fourth grade, we really looked at how graffiti is a form of an art form to express, often injustices or social justice issues. And our children got to visit a graffiti artist and got to do some graffiti on their own to share their message. So even though it is a curriculum that is given to us, we still make it so it's appropriate and engaging for our students and meaningful for our students. And the parents are a huge part of it, being invited to the school to see our art, to participate, and then with the communication that goes out regularly.
Great, thank you for sharing that. So just, following up on that, there's a lot of great efforts that for parents. What exactly do parents need to know to ensure that their children are getting the help that they need? Or what kinds of questions should they be asking?
So I think the one thing that parents should ask is, how did my children do on their screener, right? And it's important, and this is something that's going to take time, but the screener is not, your child is blue, yellow, green, red, right? It gives you a heads up. This is a screener. Your child needs to be looked at deeper. So if you're told by your child's teacher that they are below benchmark or well below benchmark, the first thing the parent should ask is, what did you do to figure out why? Right? Because that's what's really important, the why. And then after that, okay, so what intervention are you doing to address those skills that were identified in the diagnostic? Parents are entitled to this. Now, this is a question I have for New York City, and I haven't gotten one yet, but I'm going to keep asking. Our students take the screener, and we have students that are in the 16th percentile. They should be assessed for dyslexia. Like, I have we know that it affects 10 to 20% of every classroom. At our school, all of our special education teachers have been trained with their, Orton Gillingham, but it's not a dyslexia specific program. But if they move to another school, they're just in general special ed. That doesn't mean they're getting someone that's trained to address dyslexia? And do they even need special ed? They need appropriate instruction. So my question to the DOE is, we're doing the screener. Where's the next step? I have screened and identified students that need to be assessed for dyslexia. Where do I send them? That seems to be a void right now within the DOE. Because I don't think they necessarily, if you look at the statistic, especially of our Black and brown boys that go into special ed, I don't want to send them to a traditional special ed program. I just want their dyslexia needs addressed or dysgraphia needs addressed. And that seems to be like we're heading in the right direction, but that seems to be the next step, I think, that needs to be addressed quickly. Like the school-based support teams, if your child is suggested to go to a special ed referral, especially like based on their screen or they're well below benchmark, the parent should say, I noticed they're well below benchmark on Acadians. Are they going to receive a dyslexia assessment? That's a fair question to ask, I think. But
Yeah, no, it is. And I think that's a very good perspective on what you're sharing here, right? On what parents can be asking and sort of the types of questions that they can ask. And we are going to be joined by a parent shortly to share her own experiences too. But before we transition to Yana, our parent, can you just really quickly touch on the foundational skills part of NYC Reads?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Can you just really quickly touch on the foundational skills part of NYC Reads?
So it's phonemic awareness, phonics, and that all leads into fluency. And we know at our school that fluency is the bridge to comprehension, right? So it isn't for them to do well on a foundations test by any means. Our school uses the HMH into reading structured literacy. And HMH actually used the letter scope and sequence, and it has like an Orton Gillingham flow to it. So my teachers, of course, gravitated toward it, and our assistant principal. So, you know, they need to know my child is learning those letter sound relationships in a systematic and explicit way. When your children are being sent something home, were they taught most of the letter sound patterns? One of the curriculums that New York City has chosen, Foundations, it is a little limited in the decodable text. But if you chose HMH into reading for your knowledge base, because if you think about Scarborough's reading rope, the bottom part is that foundational skills, the phonemic awareness and phonics, and that's addressed by most schools with Foundation. HMH into reading, L, wit and wisdom, they're the top part of Scarborough's reading rope. That's the knowledge, the vocabulary, background knowledge, language. So even though you have foundations, if you bought HMH into reading, you can still use their decodable text. And those texts need to be going home with the students, and that's what they should be practicing to read fluently. You know, it's a mix of, it's mostly decodable, but they have high frequency words and content words. So that's what the parent should be looking for, not a leveled book that's A, B, C, D by any means. And unfortunately, we have consultants with the DOE that aren't trained in the science and reading, aren't trained in the curriculum, but they're still going into schools and maybe suggesting those level texts. So you as a parent need to say, I don't really care about this CD book. I'd like to know where's the decodable text that goes with what they're learning in phonics, please. I would give that parent a hug. I'd be so happy.
Well, thank you, Teresa. It's very comprehensive. And also I think something that's really critical, right? And sharing and trying to help parents understand what's going on in this process and how to best support their child. So thank you, Teresa. And that really is a great transition into our next speaker, Yana, who is a parent of a child in PS 303Q Academy for Excellence Through the Arts. And Yana, could you share a little bit more about your child's reading journey, including the challenges of diagnosed dyslexia, which in your example, I believe took 2 years, and then the obstacles that you faced along the way?
Yes. So, you know, my daughter started kindergarten, and then just to back that up, that she did have some speech issues earlier on, and she did receive some early intervention services in her daycare and pre-K. But then we went into the pandemic, and then when she started kindergarten during the pandemic, she started, her teacher started noticing some academic troubles. For example, when she would say, and just wanted to also preface that I do read to my child every night, so I have an older child, and we do read on a daily basis. And so what I did was I agreed to an evaluation that the teacher suggested, which was more of a speech evaluation. It was done remotely during the pandemic. And then as a result of that speech evaluation, there were some phonemic awareness difficulties identified in that report, but no diagnosis. Then the school proceeded with a psychoeducational evaluation, and again, some issues with, identifying, reading the first letter of the word, not really not really trying to read the rest, not even knowing where a sentence begins in a book. She would always point to the right side instead of the left. And so that those sort of things were written up in the report, but not exactly a diagnosis. And as a parent, this is not my field of expertise. Reading is not literacy is not my field of expertise. I'm an accountant. So I went along with the recommended services, which was speech, OT, and an ICT classroom. Then also my daughter's a November child, and New York City has pretty much no cutoff date. So basically a December child could be in the same room with a January born child. So I figured we'll hold her back, and she started kindergarten. She repeated kindergarten basically, and we figured that would help her get the leg up. That didn't happen, unfortunately, and that prompted me to look into this even further. I signed up for the Healthy Brain Network evaluation performed by the Child Mind Institute, which is free. There's a waiting list on that. That's about a few months long. And then I did a lot more research. So that study took about a few months. So it took about a year and a half to get a diagnosis by the Healthy Brain Network. Within that time, I went on Facebook to the Queens Special Needs group, did some more research there. And then now does it work? And I was telling my coworkers, my child is having difficulty associating sounds with letters. Someone said, have you ever looked into dyslexia? And I didn't even know what that was. So I started thinking about that diagnosis, and then I did receive a diagnosis of a language disorder by the Child Mind Institute. However, when I looked into language disorder, I noticed that one of the items for the language disorder, for developmental language disorder, is that she may have trouble with comprehension, and I did not see that trouble with comprehension. So when I did my research into also at the same time, I apologize, sorry, I missed out. I also booked appointments with pediatricians. I booked an appointment with a neurologist. Pediatrician told me that he doesn't know what's wrong because that's not his area of expertise. He's more into looking into physical health. Then I went to speak with a neurologist. He said that that's not his field of expertise. I need a neuropsychologist. And then I looked into the cost for that, and that is about $6,000 to about $7,500, which my husband didn't really accept that there are any really difficulties, so we didn't really want to inherit that cost. I did some more research, and I found that apparently a parent is entitled to an independent evaluation paid for by the DOE. So I reached out to the school psychologist and asked for that independent evaluation by a neuropsychologist from the DOE. And I received, after I made that specific request, I received a voucher. And I went to one of the independent evaluators. Her name is Kayla Downing. She gave me a diagnosis. And again, there was a 2-month wait list to go to her. She gave me a diagnosis of dyslexia and ADHD. And she suggested interventions by a certified Orton-Gilligan based or Wilson or any other Orton-Gilligan multi-sensory based interventions. And then while my daughter was receiving special needs, I noticed that her reading obviously isn't doing well. So I asked specifically for more reading help. And I didn't really know how to say that in the terms that the DO understands. And then the psychologist told me that's called SETS, and we'll get you into that program. So after I received, so she's been receiving sets. She's also, because she entered school during the pandemic, she missed out on services. I also asked for compensatory services in the forms of sets, and she did receive that. And after I finally got the diagnosis, I reached out back to the school and I said, well, here's the neuropsych. It says that I need an interventionist certified in Orton Gilligan or Wilson. Can you let me know if that's what she's receiving? And they said, she's actually receiving her SETS intervention from, well, first of all, the school is a balanced literacy school, and for their general curriculum, and she's receiving her intervention in IRLA. And if you Google IRLA, you can't find any information on it. I went to a community of teachers on Facebook that said that's another balanced literacy curriculum. So she hasn't been receiving appropriate interventions. She has not been receiving an appropriate curriculum at her school. They wanted to transfer us over to another school into a 12-to-1 classroom. And again, when I noticed that the need is a literacy specialist who is certified in Wilson or Orton Gilligan, I refused that placement because it's not appropriate. The appropriate need is to receive literacy interventions. So I asked for that. The principal refused. She said, I already had a SETS provider or a reading interventionist at my school. I don't need another one. I had to go to mediation. I had to go through the independent SETS list provided by the New York City DOE. I had to go through a Wilson's company certified Wilson provider list and correlate both and ask if the provider receives New York City DOE funds. I hit gold after pretty much a whole day of calling every provider on that list and asking them if they receive funds. I found one who was in the area. I called her and she agreed. Then I called a mediator. I won those hours and I received those services. At the same time, the psychologist, after I spoke to her and I explained to her what's happening, I called for an IEP meeting. We've also been deferred to a state state-funded school, non-public state-funded school. So at the moment, we're looking at schools and seeing how we can find a school that meets our daughter's needs.
Wow, so that's a long journey.
That is a long journey.
And so in total, how long has this taken you?
2 years, about 2 years.
2 years, right? And so you've gone through wait lists.
We're in second grade.
It's
Yes.
been
Wait lists, times, times for waiting for appointments, waiting to do the study by the Child Mind Institute, waiting to find a person who can actually do the right intervention, wasting time. She was wasted. Her time was wasted. I also, by the way, I had a tutor at the same time. I hired a tutor. I also went to Hunter. I had her go to Hunter, which provides Wilson interventions as well during kindergarten in the middle of the day, and I work. I went to Hofstra. I went to the Windward Summer School. And I did all those things at the same time. And I also bought my own curriculum just at the same time because I was just frustrated. Asked for decodable books. I asked for, during our recent progress reporting conversation with the teachers, I asked how she was doing. They said she's doing great. She loves reading. I asked for the Acadian screening results, compared them to the beginning of the year, and that is not true. Her oral fluency went down. Honestly, I think this is way more work that a parent should be doing, and not receiving any information from the school and not receiving any support from the school, or not even offered school, or not being transparent in terms of what they're providing. So that's disappointing. That's hugely disappointing.
That is disappointing. So what suggestions would you have for schools so that, families can get the timely supports that their children need?
So my suggestion is, again, I think this was spoken about previously. My suggestion is teacher training, and the provision of appropriate interventions. So the SETS providers have to be certified in Wilson, Orton Gilligan, whatever other Barton. There's so many other proven curriculums that work. and the earlier the better, so that the parents don't have to aren't faced with having to leave the public school system or having to roll through the public school system, not having their child read.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm sorry that it's an ongoing process, but hopefully you'll be able to have some resolution soon.
And or at least also maybe some truth, some transparency, and saying, I believe in this approach, and say what the approach is, so that the parent can go back and look it up and do some more research and figure it out.
Right. And so I think this is the perfect example of why we're trying to host a webinar like this, to share more about the information and sort of come up with some solutions that schools and the communities can come in together and provide support to families. So thank you, Yana, for sharing your story and your daughter's story. So now we're going to shift a little bit to focus on what community-based organizations can do to support families outside of the schools. So we have Tabitha Garcia, who is a parent workshop facilitator with La Fuerza de Familias Latinas and Literacy Partners. Literacy Partners goes into schools and communities, meets with Spanish and English-speaking parents to encourage them to help their children with reading at home. Tabitha, as a parent, you were a participant in a Literacy Partners workshop. Can you give us a little bit of an example of what you learned there and how it helps you or your child read?
Yes, Natasha, before I go into La Fuerza, I just want to give Yana a big applause. I have to commend you, Yana, because you are your child's advocate. And we need that. And I encourage you to start a parent support group for parents that are blindsided. They don't know who to turn to. And there's so many parents that are dealing with situations and they're frustrated and they don't know where to start. So Yana, my heart goes out to you because I know how frustrating, overwhelming it has been, and it still is. But you know what? You're doing it for your child. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Tabitha Garcia. I'm so excited to be here and to be part of one of the panelists. I love listening to everyone and what they're putting into and how New York City is taking this as an initiative, right? Us at La Fuerza and Literacy Partners, we are intentional of teaching parents on how they can help their children's reading development, right? So they go through a 5-series workshop, and in those workshops, we have examples. We have them also hands-on where they're engaging and we're coaching them on how they can make reading an experience, a positive experience for children, because we know that homework time is always a task. The children don't want to do it. The parent is not looking forward to it. So as a parent, I came in and I was just like amazed at all the techniques, the strategies that were shared. And that's when I fell in love with the program. I said, I have to be a part of this because I'm passionate too. My background is that English was my second language. And at home, I had no one to practice with me. When I went home, no one to help me with homework. So I was one of those kids that did dial a teacher. I called dial a teacher. And it amazes me that when I share that information with other parents, they don't even know what dial a teacher is. But as a parent, I saw the value of how they go and teach us to partner up with teachers. We can no longer leave the responsibility to the educators, to the teachers, because they have, from 12 to 25 students at a time. It's impossible for them to evaluate closely, right? But we can be our best teacher at home by practicing that gym partner. I always compare it to a gym partner. You never want to go to the gym by yourself, but if you go with a partner, that person is encouraging, motivating you. And I fell in love with a concept that they use, which is moments of connection. Moments of connections we encourage parents to have on a daily basis. These moments of connection, they're these special moments where a parent engages with the child, they're connecting, but at the same time, there's a learning practice behind it. So if we're going to read a book, let's have fun with it. You take a turn, you read. then I'll take the turn, then I'll animate, I'll do a funny voice, then you do a funny voice, right? So it's engaging. So you're connecting with the child. So the child looks forward to having these special moments of connection. We call them mocks, these mocks with the parent, right? And it creates a habit, a positive habit of reading time. We want to be able to create, as a parent, a safe environment, a safe space for the child. So we encourage that, you practice with them. We encourage that you reward progress, right? That you allow mistakes. Mistakes will happen. So, we have to kind of train parents that you have the abilities. If we give you the skills, you have the abilities to help your child in their reading development.
Thank you for sharing that. So what are some of the challenges that parents face in helping their kids with reading now?
So they're not aware, they don't know about phonemic awareness or phonics. And these are areas that must be mastered. I break it down to them, right, in the series of the workshops, but I also I tell them it's almost like going into division, but you don't know your multiplication tables. You don't know your timetables. It's going to be challenging for a child. So you must master phonemic awareness and phonics. And I get tons of, the majority of our families are Spanish. First language is Spanish. And I tell them, there's no excuse. Even if you have to do it in Spanish, but you're already creating a habit, something as simple as counting syllables, something as simple as saying out the sounds. And here, these Spanish parents, they're learning English with their child as they practice with their child. So, wow, they're both, it's like win-win, right?
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And so you touched on the science of reading, which is a newer workshop at La Fuerza. Can you describe it a little bit in more detail?
Yes. So like the 5 days, day one, we go over providing that safe experience. We go over actual examples. We show them a video with an example, like a parent. We also have them practice it with me. I'll coach them like, okay, so tell me how you would read that line with an exclamation point. And how would you read that line with a question mark? Simple stuff, basic stuff that they may already know this in Spanish, but they want to go over it with their children in English, right? And language is a big barrier for lots of families, and I get it. But at the same time, they're learning. I said, this is a way for you to learn English. If you start just as your child is starting with phonemic awareness, with phonics, sounding out those words, those letters, right? So I break it down for them. And I also mentioned, well, when you have a parent-teacher conference and the teacher is expressing about the phonemic awareness level or phonics level of your child, you know exactly what it is that you have to practice with your child. And I tell them, you need your own teacher reference notebook and start evaluating. Master, see if they know from A through Z. Do they know their alphabets? Do they know decodification? Putting words together, separating them. So we really go into it and we practice with the parents, and they love it. They come out of the workshops loving what they now know. It's an ability, it's skills that they're actually learning, just like the children are learning. So at the same time, we put them together. It's like, wow. I love that they share these moments of connections when we get back together in the next session, and they'll share, yeah, my child was very happy and we enjoyed it. It's important for the parent to set that environment, to set that aura, like, let it be fun, let it be a great experience. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a great experience, definitely, and a great workshop series for parents. So what advice would you give schools to help families get more involved and engage in reading?
Definitely offering parents these workshops. They sometimes, and I see it, a flyer will be distributed through the different platforms, and they really don't know the importance until I make that phone call. Sometimes I'm provided a list of parents, and I make that phone call, and then I speak with them and I tell them, this is what the science of reading is, and this is how it's going to help you and your child. So it's important to share this information. Start training parents that they can no longer leave education, their children's education, to the school system. We have to also be involved, and that this is where literacy partners and La Fuerza, we are that bridge with the schools and the parents. We are that bridge of how we bring them together.
Thank you so much for sharing that great information about the work that you're doing at La Fuerza. It's great to hear that, and as a participant and now a facilitator yourself. So that leaves us, I think we had some great information. Thank you to all of our fantastic speakers. We're going to open it up to questions right now. I know we have a lot of questions going on, so please feel free to type it in the Q&A feature. And while we're looking through the questions, maybe we can ask Pilar and Teresa, how can we be sure in the future a child like Yana's daughter doesn't fall through the gaps? How would you support families and children like Yana's daughter at your school?
That's so interesting, because I just spent the day with my assistant principal going through our progress monitoring data and identifying every kindergarten, first and second grade student that isn't making progress with intervention, right? Since the middle of the year screener. So I think that it's the next step of these parent conversations, right? Like, this is what you need, this is what we have to support you. But I think that it's just really, are your schools using the data effectively in order to meet the need? Now, as a little literacy coach, I have a little different role. So, and I know not all schools have one, but if we notice class 1, 2, 3, 8 students aren't making growth, I have the ability to go in, see those 8 students, and maybe I can notice something that the classroom teacher didn't. And then I can have conversations with parents and have parents come in. If it's scattered around, I can also notice bigger trends. Like, is it something with the curriculum that we need to adjust? Is there a misconception? So to me, I think that parents, and this mom that shared did it, you have the right to be more demanding, right? You've trusted us with your most precious possession in the whole wide world. It is a gift, and we should be honored that you did that. However, you also have the right to demand excellence of all educators. And especially, like, there was a mom I met with via a translator, and to be honest, I have no idea what language it was. But it was almost like me, like, helping her. No, you have the right to ask for this. You have the right to demand it. And so if every parent just left today feeling empowered to demand, and to me, that's the biggest fear. Parents don't know what to demand or what to ask. So find someone at your school that's willing to walk alongside you and do that with you. And then I do think, from a DOE, I mean, I can't speak for the DOE. I'm like this little big pebble in their great big thing, but I think they should do a better job listening to the parents and honoring those requests. The fact that there's still a school in 2023, 2024 doing balanced literacy is not acceptable.
Thank you for sharing that. Pilar, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with the progress monitoring. It's really like we are looking at every single kindergarten student, every single first grade student, every single second grade student, and knowing who all of those students are that need the extra support, or who are the students who we have questions about. And I think that and then communication is the other big important piece. How are we communicating this information to families, to teachers, to students within our school, and how are we looking at our solutions both on an individual, we need to know what Yana's daughter needs. And also we need to have a school-wide approach to fix up those needs, that it's not just based only on an individual, but based on systems within the school. And so I think communication is really communication, education, progress monitoring, and data is really important here.
Yeah, and the communication about, like, I would say communication about what parents are entitled to. For example, if a teacher at any point in that my process would have said, hey, you know what, you're entitled to an independent evaluation. Here's where that says, you know, here's the parental rights guidebook, which they threw at me like an attachment with about 50 pages in it, who would ever go through a 50-page document and go through every instance that could possibly happen within the DOE system and say, oh, well, that exactly right there, that applies to me. You know, the teacher has to say, we did the psychoeducational evaluation. You're also entitled to a neuropsychological evaluation. Here's where it says that. Go to the psychologist or talk to the psychologist themselves and say, your child can go to you go through a neuropsychological evaluation. And that would have saved me so much time. And then the other thing is, the teachers have to know what works and what doesn't. I expect them to tell me that. I don't expect to be, I shouldn't be expected to be arguing with the principal about, while she's still an educator, she is an educator that bought into the wrong curriculum, the wrong type of, the wrong way of teaching how to read. I shouldn't have had to go through Sold a Story and figured it out on my own. How many parents are expected to go through that and say, well, wait a second, you bought into Lucy Calkins's wrong curriculum? Why don't you change that? You know, that's where we're coming from, you know, and if that's her belief system, then say, that's my belief system. There are different ways of thought. Go and look into it. You know, that's the sort of communication I'm expecting. And I did not get that. When I came back with data, when I brought in Debbie Meyer, she's an advocate in this group, we were shut down. We were not talked to. We were told, we were actually, I never got responses. I sent emails, multiple emails. I was actually told recently that I can't email the teachers anymore. I have to send in notes. I used to send in articles from Chalkbeat, from Gotham, from every possible educational publication. No response. And even now, I think the teacher was telling me on the way out of school, she said, actually, you know what, the New York City DOE is going towards the science of reading, what you were saying. It sounded like they didn't know why the curriculum is changing. And then last year's teachers even said, wait, it's changing? Well, that's another curriculum. How do you know that'll work? So that's the sort of education that I'm expecting of teachers, not me, you know, having to look into it, doing research and whether it's valid and saying, this is what it should be. It sounds like the consensus out there in the education world is that the science of reading is the movement that is the correct movement. And then as a leader, I expect the principal to also say, I made a mistake. We're course correcting.
Thank you for sharing that, Yana. And I think that's like what we're hoping to do, is get the word out and the information to families and schools so that they can understand the information to share with parents. And so, you know, building off of that, there was a question for parents who have lower literacy levels or non-English speaking parents. So how are they being supported? How is this information being shared with families who do not speak English or speak indigenous languages, maybe not one of the DOE languages? How are they supposed to understand what's happening, the curriculums that are being used, and how they can support their children at home? So throwing this out for the whole panel, if anyone has any suggestions on that end.
I think one of the things that in D3 that we look to do is, like with any initiative, we would work to find the way that's going to reach parents, right? So whether that means like really being mindful and aware of the languages that are spoken and how we can tap into families to make sure that the information gets distributed in an appropriate manner. In some schools that might be principals chats with the translator, or if the PC speaks that particular language, finding ways to support them in understanding the curriculum, and then also the parent resources. And a lot of the pieces that were shared today from Pilar and Teresa and Tabitha about how to support their child's learning at home. But I think a part of that comes at the school level, and then if the school needs support, looking to the district as far as how we can continue to make sure that we have resources available in all of those languages.
Does anybody else want to add on? Pilar or Teresa?
Yeah, I mean, I think, following up on what Novella was saying, and on an individual school level, we know, the languages spoken in our school. We have, so for example, our biggest ENL population are Arabic speakers. We have a paraprofessional who speaks the same language as families. She's bringing in a moms group of some of our moms and working on teaching them English, and then also building the bridge to school and communication, where it was really hard for communication and to bring families in for lots of different reasons. I'm seeing it now. They're coming in, they're coming to class, they're speaking more English, they're asking more questions, knowing how to advocate. And the bridge here was really finding a person who could help to support that school home cultural divide that exists for this community in our school. And so, and starting with these moms who have been who have this relationship.
Well, and I'm sorry, just to add on to that, I work with dual language middle school, MS 247, and one of the things that they have is a Padres event every month. So inside of that piece, then it's really parents speaking with other parents about the curriculum and ways to support their child's learning at home. And in addition, the school really does a lot of work around like sending Feliz Viernes. So like notices that go out every Friday about what's happening in the child's classroom and for each grade. So there's information on what's happening in ELA, math, social studies, and so on. But since there's that frequent communication, I think it does in some ways put families at ease. And then with the Padres, like creating almost like a safe, maybe low stakes way for folks to begin to engage in the curriculum that doesn't, for some folks, like create a dynamic that might make families feel uncomfortable in expressing what they have questions about or what they are entitled to advocate for their children.
Great, thank you so much. We're running out of time, so just one last question. How are schools preparing to promote reading during the summer? Their family book giveaways, library kind signups, other ways?
We're doing all those things. We have a third grade trip tomorrow to the library to get library cards. We've been doing tons of book giveaways. We have a book swap tomorrow, actually, for reading Spirit Week. And we are a summarizing site also. So we will be doing lots of reading here in school.
Thank you. Tabitha?
So I wanted to mention that each parent participant in our workshops, they are given 5 amazing books for their children's reading level, and they can start their own library at home. And it's a beautiful thing. And they get so excited when they receive these books in the mail. So that's also a benefit from taking these workshops. So please help us share the word, Science of Reading workshops at Literacy Partners. And we do them both virtual, in person, English, Spanish.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our fantastic panel for sharing so much great information and your insights today. it's really clear that, there's a need for listening and collaboration to help more children learn how to read. And that change takes time and effort, but it's really vital for ensuring equity and inclusivity. So thank you everyone for joining us and sticking with us for the whole time. Thank you to the New School and the Levin Endowment for providing us this forum. Special thanks to Ladi Rashka, who worked tirelessly finding our speakers, as well as to Anisha and Paul, our research assistants, for their help with planning and helping us navigate the chat, technology, and live tweeting the events. So InsideSchools will also be co-hosting a webinar with the Dyslexia Alliance for Black Children on Tuesday, May 7th at 7 p.m. This webinar will be for parents and will provide more in-depth advice about helpful questions to ask your child's teacher, how to support your child's reading at home, and much more. We'll share details in an email to everyone along with a recording of today's webinar. Everyone will get that recording along with the resources and links that were shared. Thank you again to our fantastic and amazing panelists. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to answer everyone's questions, but we'll share more information and the recording to everyone. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank you all. Night.
You, bye.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.